I would like to invite more questions if you have. Yes, please.
I'd like to come back to the question of the gentleman from Denmark, because I'm not sure if Branko Milanovic, perhaps you could comment on that. I think you asked that, do we need inequality to create quality? And to which I think, Patricia, you said you have statistics where GDP increases if you increase the income of the lower...
Quintile, yes, income brackets.
Right. Perhaps that's true. Is that true? And this is a question for me, for Branko Milanovic. Perhaps that's true for one country. So in order to increase the equality in one country, do we need another country that's not equal to that country to make the inequality within country A larger? I'm not sure I'm making myself clear. Was this part of your question? So do we need to exploit the opportunities from another country? Or let's put it this way. Would Germany's industry have become so strong if it didn't have the export markets where the economy was growing?
I will not reply to that question directly because, of course, that would lead us to the macro issues and the euro and so on. But let me just factually on the question that you asked. The IMF study actually is a cross-country study. So basically it's like, 80 countries or so. What was interesting in the IMF study was, of course, that you would not expect the IMF to come up with a study like that until probably last 2 or 3 years. So it attracted lots of attention. But let me just put it like that. That whole area has been very lively in the 1990s and then was dropped. The reason being is that the conclusions span the entire gamut from inequality is bad for growth to inequality is good for growth. And I think the way that now new studies are going, and I think I'm very sort of optimistic about them, is the following. Is no longer consider inequality and growth in themselves. Actually, that's what we can now do with microdata. In other words, in the past, we would actually regress regress Gini coefficient on GDP. It's very rough. So now what we want to do, and people have started doing that, break inequality into different parts. Inequality amongst the rich, inequality amongst the poor, inequality as the gap between the poor and rich. That's one possibility. Different possibility, break inequality today into a part of inequality which is due to inequality of opportunity and the residual, which is presumably inequality in effort. And actually, there are very interesting work by two Spanish authors, Marrero and Rodriguez, who are actually the first to have done that. And they find a very strong correlation. I think it's actually very interesting for both Europe, EU countries, and American states between inequality which is due to lack of opportunity and low growth. In other words, if you have lots of let's suppose your inequality today is 100. And let's suppose I can tell that 60% of that, it's complicated how you get to that, but 60% is due to the fact that we actually start unequally. Our parents are rich or poor, we inherit all of that, from them or not. And then the countries that have a higher share of that inequality register lower growth. So you see that actually it's, I think, very promising venue for research because you don't treat inequality anymore as a one homogeneous entity, say inequality, end of story. Here we are really talking about two inequalities. The first inequality which is bad because it's inequality due to inheritance, and the second inequality which is inequality due to presumably effort. So I think that the work which is now, and actually I had with co-author Roy Van der Weide a paper on the US, we disentangle also growth. Because growth, we are too much talking about growth as a mean. That's actually GDP per capita. We really would like to look at growth at different percentiles of the income distribution. So to cut long story short, I think the future work would be the work in disaggregating inequality and the work on disaggregating growth, and then linking the two. Because the previous line of research, which was simply Gini coefficient versus GDP, really did not lead to anywhere. Because it was too rough. You couldn't get really anything out of that.
So we have to define equality in various terms.
Yes, absolutely. And even there was actually an original paper by Sarah not Vishnyovsky, I'll remember in a moment, that actually took inequality amongst the poor people and amongst the rich people. And the two inequalities have different impact on growth. You know, the poor among poor people has a negative impact because actually basically it's lack of social cohesion and inclusion. The equality amongst the rich actually has a positive impact because presumably these people are actually investors. So, you know, it's a very complicated story. I believe that a single story like inequality as such, growth as such, I don't think it's going to work.